Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Transit Agency's Guide to Joint Development. My name is Hillary Reeves. I work at RailVolution. We're very glad to bring you this webinar today.
Thanks, Hillary. This is Lucy Galbraith, and I am the first Director of Transit-Oriented Development in Minneapolis. This is the second time I've gotten to start a TOD office in a transit agency, and I've been kind of really involved in urbanist behavior for the last 20 years in various governments and nonprofits and private consulting. And my specialties, my thing is the intersectionality of urban design and economics, and so TOD works really well for me. I have spent far too much of my life in various universities and have degrees from Rice and Yale. And I think we have a fabulous panel today. It's practitioners, and it's going to be interactive, and we're going to kind of swap roles as we go through this. So just to briefly introduce this great panel, Thatcher Imboden is the Deputy Director of TOD at Sound Transit in Seattle. And he moved there from Minneapolis, and we miss him. Since going there in 2015, he oversees the surplus property and joint development portfolio, seeking opportunities to leverage these assets for local and regional equitable TOD goals. While he was here in Minneapolis, he managed the TOD program for Hennepin County. And prior to that, he worked in commercial real estate development on various community development projects. His focus is understanding the systems that drive the changes to cities over time and figuring out how can we implement our desired changes. He's also a published author, a husband, and a father who embarrasses his family by telling lame dad jokes. I haven't heard those, Thatcher. I look forward to hearing those sometimes. Anyway, the next introduction I want to do is of Debbie Frank, who's the Director of TOD in MARTA, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority in Atlanta, Georgia. And she has a strong background in real estate development and urban planning. She's an expert with over 20 years of success, both making development happen and managing redevelopment initiatives and projects for private and public sector organizations. And she's skilled at assembling real estate teams to carry a project from concept to completion. And among her many abilities, she's a collaborator. She engages community members, political stakeholders, and real estate development professionals. And of course, among the gifts you have to do all that is being a strong communicator who can build credibility, manage expectations of internal and external stakeholders, and actually deliver the projects. So we're really happy to have Debbie with us today. And then our speaker, who is also an expert practitioner, is Al Rain, who's the National TOD Practice Director at AECOM, and he lives and works out of Boston, Massachusetts. He's the principal investigator and lead author on the guide to joint development, which comes out of the TRB study H57, and that's the topic of our webinar today. He also has over 40 years senior level experience in transportation and development, working on all kinds of projects, including Denver Union Station and Assembly Square. He's advised transit systems. He was formerly executive director of the Massachusetts Port Authority, which I have a hard time not just saying Massport, and a Massachusetts Secretary of Economic Development, and is, maybe not now, but was and will be again, a daily MBTA rider. So Al is going to give a presentation, a quick kind of overview of this guide. It will be posted imminently soon, and we will share the link, of course, with everyone. And then we will take a few questions from the Q&A box after Al's presentation, and then we'll shift to a panel discussion format where Al will become the moderator and I'll shift to being a panelist. So Al, if you would take it away.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my PowerPoint. There we are, up on my screen. There we are. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. This is the Guide to Joint Development for Public Transportation Agencies, commissioned by the Transportation Research Board. It was my great honor to be the principal investigator and lead author. There was a wonderful study team, which I'll mention and credit at the end. And I'm talking to you from Rockport, Massachusetts, where the commuter rail has run into Boston since 1834. and I was not on the first train. The purpose of the guide is to expand the successful practice of joint development, not only through the variety and quality of projects achieved, but more fundamentally through the number and diversity of transit agencies involved. In order to do this, we conducted an extensive outreach and research effort in which we spoke in depth and at length to 32 transit agencies, 30 in the US and 2 in Canada, 18 municipal, county, and regional government entities, and 17 private sector actors, developers, lenders, investors, for-profit, non-profit. We deliberately try to overlap them in markets, not entirely, but substantially, so we actually compare what they said about their shared experiences. And they were chosen for diversity of region, institutional diversity. In the case of transit agencies, we got a very representative diversity of region, system size, transit modes, and the degree of experience in joint development. You'll be able to find, when the guide is published later this fall, you'll be able to find the detailed research reports on these 3 surveys in the technical appendices that will be published at that time. And you'll also find in the technical appendices a write-up of the very substantial literature review that we did, not only to inform our own work, but to define a meaningful joint development literature and provide practitioners with a roadmap for where to find it. So a quick look at what we're going to talk about today, which is a quick look at the guide. I'm going to begin by summarizing the definition and framework to describe joint development that we created for the guide. I'm going to give you a little preview of how the guide is actually organized, what you'll find when it's published and you open it up and look at it. I'll give a few highlight recommended best practices that come out of the guide. And I'm going to conclude with a discussion of expanding the joint development horizon, which is a persistent theme all the way through the guide. So beginning with definition and framework. The guide defines joint development as real estate development that occurs on transit agency property or through some other type of development transaction to which the transit agency is a party. Joint development is physically or functionally related to the transit, and transit agencies generally have some skin in the game and derive benefits through revenues, increased ridership, transit improvements, or ideally some combination of the above. Now, this transit-based definition opens up a typology of joint development projects. It certainly includes traditional projects on transit agency property at or near a station, that's the blue column, but it also includes the green column, which is development at or near a station that meets our transactional definition, but occurs on somebody else's land, and it includes the red column, which is the opportunity for transit agencies to develop assets they own not at a station. And we'll come back to all of that as we go on. Joint development is not limited to cases where FTA is involved. That only arises in a subset, an important subset, but a subset of joint development activity. But where FTA involvement does arise, the guide has a great deal to say about how to make the most of that opportunity. We avoid defining joint development as a subset of TOD for a reason. It's a foundational principle of the guide that joint development should be transit-oriented and not merely transit-adjacent. The guide continually makes the point that TOD outcomes shouldn't be assumed by definition, but have to be achieved through intentional policies. Why do transit agencies undertake joint development? The 32 that we spoke to, and really all the others that the study team is acquainted with, cite 3 overarching goals in varying orders of priority. They didn't all put them in this order, but one is to raise revenue from the deal itself, the so-called monetization of the asset. One is to increase ridership, both for its own sake, because you're in the ridership business, and for the fare box revenue that comes with it. And one is to promote TOD and all of the benefits that are associated with it. Now, a preview of what you will find when you download the guide later this year and curl up and crack open the cover. After the introductory material, you'll find a sequence of 4 chapters that give a step-by-step how-to of how to do joint development. from the foundation of creating a program to the planning of individual projects to the selection process for choosing a development partner and the execution of development projects all the way through to the end and past the end, which is an important point. After that, you'll find a set of 3 chapters that kind of pivot to a set of strategic issues that cut across the stages of the process. There's a chapter on FTA, there's a chapter on economics that combines some interesting things, which I'll get to later on today, and a chapter on this theme of expanding the joint development horizon. And in all 7 of these chapters, you'll find explicit references to best practices in a way that's respectful of the fact that one size never fits all. So some highlights, and believe me, this is just skimming the surface of what we find and recommend. You have to organize for success. Now, if you're doing just one project, you can be selective about this, but if you're contemplating a series of projects or a program level initiative, then you need to create, sooner or later, preferably sooner, a TOD joint development office that reports to senior management, is visible to the board, and is led by someone who can communicate seamlessly with developers and local government and is obsessed with proactive internal coordination. Can't tell you how important that is. And between your staff and your consultants, you need to have command of a number of specialized skills that don't traditionally fall within the comfort zone of transit agencies. When you're thinking about doing a project, you have to spring into action long before you select a developer. Before you seek a developer, you need to decide if your site is feasible and TOD ready, using 4 separate but interrelated criteria. And if it is TOD ready, then you should create a conceptual plan that's flexible but concrete. You want to think about the deal you eventually want to make, roles and responsibilities. What are you going to be asking this developer to do? Is he going to operate stuff? Is he going to build stuff? Is he going to pay for stuff? And can't stress enough, you want to work with local government before developer solicitation to align your project with local policy. When it comes to choosing a developer, we begin by calling out a couple of key policy questions. One is an appropriate way to deal with unsolicited proposals, a recurrent and important issue for many of us, and the importance of the preference, if it's possible and makes sense, for a long-term lease over sale, and the intentionality of thinking about that and what you gain and what you lose if you don't do a long-term lease and hold on to ownership. And then we talk about how to get it right, how to use the selection process to make a good choice of developer. And we talk about all kinds of things, but 3 of them are, what's the best solicitation format to use in general or for a particular project? We do a context-specific analysis of the pros and cons of the different methods. We talk about the sweet spot when you define the project in an RFP or RFQ, the sweet spot between flexibility and prescriptiveness, very important to get good but comparable and creative proposals, and the importance of using multiple criteria that together give you the best value, all things considered, and not the traditional reliance on high bid. Now, when you've chosen a developer, the project has barely begun. And there's a long chapter on implementation. And it begins by talking about the joint development agreement, as most agencies call it, which governs the closing, all the steps leading up to it, and all the myriad steps that occur after it. And as you can see from the sample table of contents, the joint development agreement is really kind of air traffic control for the entire project. We provide a lot of practical detail on major implementation issues that flow out of these agreements. For example, from design review that may begin right away, to oversight of construction, to the future phases of the transaction that unfold long after the original project is built and occupied, and the importance of having the capacity and the appetite to take care of those things down the road. The economic chapter, which I mentioned, begins with how you as a transit agency define an appropriate financial return. What's your business case for undertaking the project? How do you understand land value? And if you and the developer are going to argue about land value, and you will, are you at least arguing about the same thing? And this drawing here is an example of the logic diagrams that run through the guide that try to summarize a lot of material in a way that makes sense for practitioners. In that same economics chapter, the guide then turns to parking and affordable housing in some depth and detail, not only as policy issues, on which, by the way, the transit agency and the developer may well have converging views, but as cost and revenue drivers, on which you probably won't have converging views, and how these issues crop up at the heart of many a deal. I want to conclude by talking about this idea of expanding the joint development horizon. More agencies of more types, finding more kinds of project opportunities. And I like to begin with hub stations and transit centers because almost every transit system has one of these or more than one of these. And the opportunities for joint development range from large rail-based multimodal projects like Denver Union Station with 1.25 million square feet of joint development on site and millions more on the adjacent blocks, to smaller bus-based economic development projects like the Holyoke Transportation Center, 90 miles west of where I'm sitting. These projects are often complicated jigsaw puzzles from an ownership and transactional point of view. They're great opportunities for creativity, and they can make a huge difference in their cities. You should look for ways to collaborate with sister agencies or jurisdictions that own land near your stations or your street running stops. The guide identifies several different business models to do this, and these can expand or even create a joint development footprint. And Lucy's going to speak later about the very exciting project in St. Paul, which is shown here. Now, it's not news for an adjacent developer, not on your station site, but next door, to pay for a station entrance or a station connection. But what is kind of new is that some developers are taking on the work and even the cost of a new station, a station replacement or a major station upgrade, not out of altruism, but because it unlocks the value of their site. And the Assembly Square project shown here is one of several such projects involving the MBTA. Value capture and joint development, they're obviously not the same thing, but sometimes a project has both. And sometimes, if a value capture district is organized around station area development and the transit agency is a planning partner, and the tax increment or special assessment revenues flow by contract right into the transit improvement, then the line between joint development as we've defined it and value capture becomes very blurry. This is a real opportunity, and it happens more often than you may think. A new or extended corridor is an opportunity to plan not only for TOD in general, but for joint development specifically from day one. Consistent with your Enabling Act, you should be evaluating staging sites, parking lots, and other station needs with joint development in mind. And if your new or extended corridor is going to be FTA assisted, then you have a built-in opportunity to create FTA-assisted joint development as well. And finally, transit agencies have an opportunity to develop non-station assets. Now, some of these are remote facilities and non-transit locations, and they're primarily commercial opportunities, that's fine. But some of them, like the Muni's very exciting Potrero Yards modernization, which is shown here, happen to be near transit anyway and can be treated as TOD opportunities as well. That was just scratching the surface of the guide. There's, believe me, there's a lot more there. But let me end with some takeaways from what I've talked about. One is the importance of this idea of organizing for success, particularly if you want to do a lot of projects. The leadership that you put in place, your dedication to internal proactive coordination every step of the way, cultivating or bringing in through consultants the specialized skills you need, inventorying your property so you know not only what you own, but what the conditions are affecting it, and publishing an official policy that combines and emphasizes both your process, your joint development procedures, and the TOD outcomes that you want to achieve. Second, There's no substitute for working effectively and seamlessly with local government as regulators, which is almost always the case, but also potentially as real estate partners or as funding sources or as people who influence other people's funding sources. Third, it's very important to be good deal makers. You want to be good stewards as well in the choice of sites that you put out for development in the first place, in how you select developers, in how you convey property, in the way you oversee the implementation of design and construction and occupancy, and in how you equip yourself for long-term control and enforcement of the benefits you negotiated at the beginning. In the world of detail, it's very important to understand the financial and policy trade-offs among land value, ridership, parking, and affordable housing. Those come into more deals than not, and the interaction between them is critical to the outcomes you achieve and whether you're satisfied with the economic outcome. And finally, as an industry, we should be looking to expand the joint development horizon beyond projects on transit-owned real property at existing rail stations and large metro systems. We like those, we love those, and most joint development meets those characteristics. But as we've tried to show in the guide, there are opportunities for transit systems of every size and technology to look to new business models, new partners, and new ways of doing things, and joint development can reach further than you believe it can reach. I want to conclude by acknowledging and thanking the wonderful study team that produced this. At the Transportation Research Board, our Senior Program Officer, Larry Goldstein, the greatest client ever. Several of my colleagues at AECOM, led by my colleague, Jim Gast, and the sub-consultants on our team, Professor Rob Cervero, a thought leader in this whole endeavor, Strategic Economics, led by Dina Belzer, and Forward Planning, Inc., led by Todd Poole. And most, if not all of them, are listening in. Thank you very, very much. And with that, well, good. I'm frozen, but that's the last slide. I'm going to turn it back to Lucy for the next stage of the panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Al. Thanks, Al, and stay on because we do have one question in the Q&A box so far that only you can answer.
Okay.
Which is, will this PowerPoint be something we can share with all of the attendees?
Yes, the only question is when. RailVolution records this session, and Hillary can speak to that, but everybody will have access to the recording of what you're watching. And as for the PowerPoint itself, as soon as we have pre-publication clearance from TRB, then yes, we will make the PowerPoint available, and we certainly expect that that in the coming weeks, the guide itself will become available either in published or pre-published form. And I can't guarantee that for TRB, but that's the expectation. And when that happens, as Lucy said at the outset, we will share that link with everybody on this webinar.
Okay, does anyone else have, oh yes, somebody just, in terms of transit agency staffs, what is a typical size of staff and what are the skill sets that are critical for that staff to succeed? And then the rest of it I don't really see. So let's go ahead and just, do you want to say something about that? I know you said there were several things in here about the where the TOD office has to be in the structure and stuff.
Yeah, what I'd like to do actually, since three of you run joint development TOD offices, is have you guys speak to that. If you just want to briefly describe the sort of size and heft of your office.
Okay, do you want to call on me first since I think I'm already unmuted, or however you want to do it. Anyway, the office is very small. There are 5 of us, but we're part of the transit agency and we're part of the Met Council. So we have a lot of resources outside of our office. For example, the whole legal, accounting, real estate offices over at Met Council are part of our resource set, and we have a community development division over there too. But here within Metro Transit, there are 5 of us, and we come from diverse backgrounds. But the thing that I look for in hiring is both a really strong interest in urban places and transit, and also I look for intersectionality, that we have someone who was working as a civil engineer, and then the Great Recession happened and went back to school in planning, so now has a very strong background that's very useful for us, but has the planning side that works. We have someone who worked in a law firm and has English degrees and then got a planning degree, so it's really lovely to have somebody who can write as well as can read legal stuff very well. And we have someone who was a heavy equipment operator and did other things, and can understand surveying and understands the legal records as far as the property stuff goes, and who also excels at GIS. So that's my perspective, and of course that comes from my own career, ADD, with economics and architecture and stuff. So I'll pass it along to someone else, see
Debbie.
what they think.
Yes, sure. So in Atlanta, we're fortunate to be within the Office of TOD and Real Estate. And our office is, actually reports to the Chief of Staff. So we are one step away from the General Manager, which is pretty neat in terms of just being able to move things through and get things done. We have a staff total of 11 individuals. Within the Office of TOD itself, we have three staff people. And I would have to concur with Lucy in terms of our staff has basically planning backgrounds. We do have someone in our TOD and real estate office overall that have finance background, surveying. It's a little bit of everything if you really think about it. But I think placemaking and understanding planning, zoning is definitely key to the work that we do.
Thatcher?
Yes, so here at Sound Transit, the land use planning and development team is a team of 9, 3 that are working with our capital transit project development side and really looking at urban design and planning thinking in the transit capital projects, and giving kind of thought to where is there joint development opportunities, and start working on is there a way to integrate joint development into actually the transit delivery process. And then we have a team of 5 that is working on more on the transaction side. And I think, building off of what Debbie and Lucy shared, kind of a variety of different expertise is needed to be successful in this kind of job. And, ultimately, whatever you don't do yourself, you work. These groups are highly dependent on our partners throughout the organization, whether or not that's our engineering team, our legal team is a key partner, but also our grants team. We have a whole staff that really are extremely creative, that know how to work with the federal government and understand all the different types of money and how that affects the projects we do. And so we couldn't do it without all the other folks outside of our team of 9.
And I'll add one thing, before we move on, there was, as I mentioned, there were specialized skills that may be completely different from what transit agency traditionally has need for. There are also skills in the area of law, procurement, and economics that the transit agency may have, but you need, between your own staff and your consultants, you need some specialization in how those affect real estate and real estate transactions. And the one thing I would emphasize, because you hear it from every developer we talk to, is how much they want to see, and you eventually want to do business with them, how important it is that the joint development office of the transit agency, either in-house or in the consultant team, have an understanding of real estate, land value, and the underpinnings of a transaction, not so that you'll agree with the developer on everything, but so that you can, be arguing about the same thing. That's critical, and developers say it over and over again. I've been asked to remind everybody, if you have a question, to be sure to put it in the Q&A box and not the chat box, so that we'll find it. And Lucy, are we going to take any more? Or are we ready to move on to the panel?
Okay, yes. There are a couple more questions, but I think we're going to discuss those as we go along. And I just want to let everybody know, I'm typing some answers in, but we will have a Q&A session after we do the panel discussion. So, these questions won't go away. If we haven't addressed what you're talking about, then that would be good. There are some specifics, like who handles negotiations and financial analysis and stuff. And as you may have heard from listening to our different fields of expertise. I mean, my background, I used to be I was a math and econ person at first. And so I tend to do a lot of the financial analysis myself, but we do have a finance department that can do it. And I guess I should have mentioned here, I report to the general manager, so I'm a direct report. So there isn't a question of access. And I actually currently office on the same hall, so I can walk down the hall and, pound on the door. So I hope our discussion will answer a lot of these other questions, and thanks, John Crocker, for typing in good answers as we go. But I think it is time to turn to the discussion time. So Al is going to ask us questions, and we're going to do our best to answer, and then of course we will comment on each other. So take it away, Al.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one round of questions to the panel that are more in the nature of high-level policy and strategic questions, and then we'll have a second round that are more in the nature of nuts and bolts questions. And the order will be Thatcher, Debbie, and Lucy, so that they all know who's going to follow whom. So Thatcher, I want to begin with, in a sense, the highest level question of all, and I know it's something that you wanted to talk about, and that's how transit agencies reconcile and prioritize those three overarching goals that I talked about at the beginning: making money, monetizing the real estate asset, growing ridership, and advancing TOD-related and derived public policy goals like equitable development, sustainability, and placemaking. And you can speak for Sound Transit, you can speak more philosophically, but how would you approach that?
Yeah, thanks, Al. And I must say that the guide is really exciting that it's coming out, and I think our agency is eager to continue to kind of work and evolve our practice. And so one of the great things about the guide is that it is really pulling on the best practices from around the country and really looking at that new horizon. So, getting to your question, I think it's really important to set up the vision. Ultimately, joint developments are transactions. And so, you have to know what you're working towards. So in some ways, it's starting with, if you're the agency that is approaching the joint development from a standpoint that you own land, or that you need to get a certain transit infrastructure component, well, then you need to know what that is that you're trying to get. So, first, I think it is what do you need to get out of the deal? Second, what are the community's needs? So that usually involves some sort of community engagement and engagement with the local jurisdictions. Additionally, what are the opportunities with the property? Because we are talking about a specific piece of property and it can only do so many things. And then really looking at, how do you balance all those different priorities? You kind of highlighted the three, and I think we're fortunate here that it's not the classic three-legged stool scenario. I think in the sense that, joint development almost always is a TOD, or a transit-oriented development. And so for the most part, creating real estate development will create space for people. And, and if it's being built next to transit, you're hoping that you're not trying to encourage people who are coming to the site via car. So, I think creating ridership is usually a part of the conversation, regardless of what the rest of the joint development is. I think the real challenge is trying to balance revenue with the other kind of public policy goals that you're trying to achieve, and that is really place specific. agency specific as to in terms of what the needs are, but also what you're allowed to do either through your enabling legislation or through your own policies. And so while our agency, I think, is has a certain amount of both statutory direction around things like affordable housing and policies around equitable development and having some tools to be able to help facilitate that, that is not necessarily always the case at other agencies. And so I think primarily it's working through and making sure you're not overloading the goals so that you can't actually realize them.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Debbie, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to these three overarching goals, when we created our TOD guidelines and policies, we've been true to all three, right? We want to increase ridership. We want to generate new revenue based on the investments that we made in creating these stations. And then we really want to help promote community development and regional economic development. And so I cannot see us doing one and not really addressing the other. And I think Thatcher really hit home with that ultimately you're going to increase ridership, right? We're going to either have ground leases or we're going to sell the property. So you are going to generate revenue to the authority. And then we go through a planning exercise with the regional planning agency in Atlanta, Livable Cities Initiative, that allows for us to engage the community about what they would like to see in terms of community development or redevelopment of our property. So I think we're hitting all three each time. I can't say that we've ever not addressed all three of these overarching goals during the process.
Lucy. You're muted.
Gotcha. Sorry. We have a TOD policy that includes 4 goals, and they include equity and ridership and revenue and maximizing the impact of transit investments and economic development for the region. And the way that those apply in practice, as both Thatcher and Debbie have said, is kind of you look at all of these things, and sometimes you can kind of hit it out of the park, and sometimes one of them is a little more emphasized than others. But what I would emphasize is that this is really site and city dependent. We have some cities that are very protective of industrial land or things that can be offices because they're more concerned about jobs than they are about housing. We have other cities that want more housing right now. And so what you said before about working with your local jurisdiction will have a big impact for us on each site's focus or kind of, what we are willing to trade off for what, if we have to do trade-offs. The things we aren't going to do trade-offs on are meeting the basic transit needs of ridership. If it's going to be an auto-oriented use, it's not going to be joint development. But all of these others are going to be really site dependent, and we are going to try to do all of the above if we can.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question, which is going to Debbie. I talked in the presentation about the importance of new corridors or extended corridors as opportunities to start thinking on day one about how to bake in not only TOD but joint development. And when we were talking the other day, you said, "Well, you got 2 of those," and wanted to talk about them. So please do.
Yes, sure. And I'm going to ask Hillary to bring up my first group of images, please.
Will do. Just one sec. Do we have it, Debbie?
It's in a smaller version if we can, and there we go. Perfect. Wonderful. So yes, Al, we have 2, MARTA has not expanded our system since the day it was created. So we are excited about the opportunity that's before us today. The first one, the slide to the right is an image of Georgia 400, and it is the northern spine of Fulton County. And we have an unbelievable opportunity working with the cities along this corridor, as well as the state of Georgia. A couple of years ago, GDOT made an announcement of actually adding express lanes along Georgia 400, estimated cost of $1.8 billion. And during that exact same time, the former governor of Georgia, Governor Deal, announced $100 million being allocated to create BRT along this stretch of Georgia 400 as well. So MARTA is working with these groups, including the community, to establish a BRT line that will start at our North Spring Heavy Rail Station, and the terminus would be our Windward Parkway Park and Ride. What is really exciting about the Windward Parkway Park and Ride is that MARTA owns 15 acres at the northern terminus of this BRT line. The line itself is 12 miles. And we are in early conversations with our planning infrastructure team about the opportunity that this may present for the very first BRT TOD development sponsored by MARTA. 15 acres in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is a very high net worth community, the burbs of Metro Atlanta. So that's one. And stay tuned. We are in the kind of engineering and design phase. There will be 4 stations along this stretch of Georgia 400. The express lanes that the state will be constructing will actually stretch 16 miles from the North Spring station. So a little 4 additional miles north of the Windward Parkway Park and Ride. And the map to your right is Clayton County is the area in white, and it is in the southern Metro Atlanta area. It's actually where our airport, Hartsfield-Jackson, is located. And I want to say in 2014, the county made a decision that they wanted to bring MARTA service to Clayton County, and approved a 1 cent sales tax increase to do just that. After the referendum passed, MARTA immediately brought bus service and mobility service to the community. And since that time, we have been working with, we being MARTA, GDOT, the county, Clayton County, and 9 cities to bring heavy rail and BRT to Clayton County. The blue line represents the 22-mile of heavy rail that would terminate at our East Point station. And then the red line is a BRT line that would terminate at our College Park heavy rail station. So this is how the community in Clayton County would actually enter the larger Metro MARTA system. One of the things that has really pleased the TOD office, I'll tell you, because we can plan all day, is that the community is taking an effort now to establish transit supportive zoning for the proposed stations. And right now, along the blue line, there are 8 proposed stations, and then along the red line, there are 10 proposed stations. Those station locations have not been approved, but the community is working through that. And I will say that we created, MARTA established the TOD guidelines and policies back in 2010. And since that time, we had 1 municipality to actually implement TOD, basically a TOD overlay zoning district, and that was College Park. And I'm so pleased that the communities in Clayton County are actually referencing our model TOD overlay zoning recommendations, if you will, to help establish their ordinance. So in some cases, there may be new ordinance created, and in other cases, there may be just modification to existing ordinances.
Thanks, Debbie. And to what degree are you able in the early planning of these stations to be, to be intentional about a joint development opportunity down the road in how you assemble right of way or where you put a station entrance?
Yeah, so it's been clear. We have a consulting team on board. They've been on board since day one. And a lot of it really centers around the amount of land area that we're able to acquire, needless to say. And or one of the things that we've tried to be clear is that it's not going to be a martyr-driven effort to establish these station locations and bring about this opportunity, because it's an opportunity for the community to do what they need to do in terms of establishing the appropriate zoning categories and getting the community buy-in as well. So we've been intentional in that way. It's a lot different than, bringing TOD in an area where there is an existing station already, or existing property where you're saying we have underutilized property here. We want to see a redevelopment opportunity take place. Here, we're trying to be intentional in terms of the type and locations, because in most cases right now, I think we're probably more heavy on areas that have a higher commercial kind of mix, if you will, and the residential would be a lot easier to introduce. Vice versa could be a challenge for them. So it's been kind of interesting to just see it all unfold, needless to say.
Great, thank you. Thatcher, you're next, and Sound Transit's explicit commitment to putting joint development in your thinking about project delivery, I think is very much related to this question. Can you comment?
Yeah, I think, when we were going out and asking voters to approve our most recent system expansion plan, there was a lot of interest by our board, by our stakeholders, by the jurisdictions, and even in our team, obviously, in trying to think about how are we really supporting TOD as a part of our transit projects, and it comes in kind of multiple different ways. One was really trying to make TOD, station access, and urban design an integral part of the throughout the life cycle of a transit project. And that really, in a lot of ways, meant front-loading a lot of the conversations around are we really trying to achieve with these transit projects. So that way, cities and communities and other stakeholders are really thinking about, really early, like 5-10% design. What are we trying to do here? Because I think oftentimes by the time they're thinking about how does this connect into my community, and where are there, how is this going to help facilitate the growth? How does that fit into our communities? That might be at 30% design, which at that point, going in a different direction has major implications for a transit project. So we've really been focused on thinking about all those different issues, including TOD and joint development early. So that way we can start thinking about, when we get a little bit further, if there was a joint development opportunity of really integrating transit infrastructure with development, how exactly do you achieve that? Are you phasing the infrastructure in a way, and are there specific investments you're going to need to make to be able to allow that phasing? Or are you going to try to find somebody who can deliver that as a part of a joint development? And to be fair, we as an agency have one vertically integrated station, but we had an institutional partner that came to the table to help make investments in the underground station infrastructure to support an overbuild. They could commit to it much earlier than I think that a typical private entity would be willing to make a commitment. Secondly, Sound Transit cannot acquire land for anything other than transit, and so we have oftentimes we're having to acquire property from people who don't want to sell, and so acquisition is an important critical path item for a lot of our transit projects, and so we can't jeopardize that. But I will say that when all other things are equal, amongst alternatives, we certainly look at whether or not construction staging that our construction management folks are looking at. How are we thinking about what residual property might come out of that, and how does that get redeployed, and how can we not design our facilities so we end up with small strips of land that people want to redevelop but can't get access to?
Good. Lucy.
Okay, for me to jump in, and land use and transit planning together are really wonderful. And I've heard the saying that the best transportation planning is land use planning. so that if you build the right stuff, then transit can serve it really efficiently. The other thing here, though, that I wanted to mention was the FTA TOD pilot planning grants that have emphasized that the corridors, the community, and the communities that want to have or have an FTA funded project need to work together so that the station areas aren't all trying to be, the complete and perfect TOD, and that they see each other as part of a whole corridor. Because if somebody can go 3 stops to meet some of their needs, they don't have to meet all of them in their station area, but it certainly raises the value of that station area to be only 2 or 3 stops from something else. So we are on our 3rd TOD pilot planning grant, and it's been a really interesting process. And I think part of it grew out of our Green Line experience. The Green Line runs from downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul through a number of neighborhoods that have been neglected over the years and haven't thrived. And so the Sustainable Communities Partnership Grant, working with a collaborative of a bunch of local foundations, worked really hard on community engagement, community involvement, and how to make this line really serve the communities it goes through, not just the endpoints. And they ended up adding 3 stations. We ended up getting an extra grant to add 3 stations to be sure that we were serving communities that hadn't, the disadvantaged communities along the line. So I think all of these efforts are, they are recent, they are future. It's like when we're planning corridors, we're planning communities, and that from the transit agency as well as from the communities and from FTA. This is, I think, now this is where we're going, and so if you're not there, get there.
Yeah, and if you look particularly at the most recent round of FTA TOD planning grants, you see how many of them in the description of the project are talking about land currently or expected to be owned by the authority. They are in no small part joint development planning at kind of the root level of doing the project. Okay, Lucy, don't go away, because the next question is for you to talk about Allianz Field. Which is interesting to me as a twofer. To me, it's a great example of this idea of working with sister jurisdictions in a real estate transaction, which I talked about during the presentation. But it's also, really a dazzling example of working with a bunch of local governments at once. And please tell us the short version of that story.
Well, I'll try to be short about it. Hillary, if you could put up there are 3 slides, and if you just rotate them, that would be great to kind of show what we got out of this. And Allianz Field is the first Allianz soccer field in North America. So we're very proud of it. But yes, the 6 governments, we had the state involved because we needed some legal changes to deal with the taxing issues and stuff at the city's request, So anyway, we all worked together on these things. And so when I say it was the state issue, it was also the city and the county and Metro Transit. But our 6 governments, there was the state government, there was the county that was interested in it from an economic development perspective, as well as the county gives grants for cleanup and things. So Ramsey County was involved, and Metro Transit, which is part of Met Council, was involved from more than one direction. Our colleagues in the other part of Met Council were giving grants while we were negotiating the real estate deal over here. And then the city's was involved in so many ways and was our primary contact. We leased the ground to the city, who then subleased it to the team. And so the city's economic development party is a separate government called the St. Paul Port Authority, because in Minnesota, at least, the EDAs are port authorities. And so the Port Authority became the project manager, since they were the ones used to handling development projects and all of the complexities and the cleanup part. So they were in the middle of it. And then, of course, our friends at FTA were the sixth government. And the FTA guidance, in my opinion, is kind of a model because it tells you what you need to do in order to gain approval. And, you know, if I'm one of those people that if I have the written directions, I can follow them. You know, I can once put together a sleeping bag from a kit because I can follow directions, even though I don't know how to sew. But so those were the six governments, and it worked the way these things are really supposed to work, which is that we weren't always happy with each other, but we got there. We got the deal done. We turned in all the things, and we got a letter of conformance from FTA that recognized the clauses we had done and all the work we had done. And so what we got as an outcome, this is a very joyous place. It's a frame with a super Teflon fabric wrap. So what you're looking at there is fabric, and it's lit from the inside with LED lighting that can be any color. And so, yeah, the nighttime, this one shows it with its blue lights on. It has actually the capacity to be rainbow or purple because this is, after all, Prince territory. So you know, it's a place that has a lot of energy when you're in it. As you can see in this photograph, it's surrounded by mostly parking lots and empty places right now. So, but it has, and it surpassed our expectations in terms of ridership. The bike racks have been full for every game. A lot of neighbors showed up and said, "My kid loves soccer. We're excited about this." So it was a challenging kind of negotiation to work through, and we had deadlines. It's like the soccer team had committed to an opening day, so we, a little out of order there, but whatever. Anyway, we all got it done, and the opening was in April of 2019. And I've toured the field, and I have to say, I think it worked there, and it is already. This is the vision. This was the rendering of the vision. But even though the rest of the things on this super block haven't come out of the ground, things across the street and within a block or two are coming out of the ground. So it's already done what we all hope one of these things will do, which is to catalyze development. This is a place that has every 10-minute LRT service, and you can see the interstate in the background, and what we call our arterial BRT service, which is every 10-minute service that moves faster. It has traffic what is it called? Not prioritization. Yes, prioritization, not preemption. Anyway, so it has a lot of transit. It has a lot of bike access. It has car access, which we don't really care about, but it has it. And, so far, until COVID hit, this had been just exceeding expectations in all directions. We did do a 50-year ground lease. We do get a chunk of change every year. We also negotiated a media deal so we can get some free advertising in their collateral and stuff. There are lots and lots of little teeny details of it, but we do have continuing control, and we're happy with it. We're happy FTA is happy with it, and I could go on forever, but I'll stop there.
It's an incredible project, and when I said that dealing with local government, can be as a regulator, a real estate partner, and a funding source. This project hit all three of those. It's really and this is a property that you own for historic reasons as a streetcar maintenance facility, right?
It was originally a streetcar barn, and then the streetcar company converted to buses in the early 1950s, and then we got UMTA grants. Remember those? And I barely. Anyway, we got UMTA grants to acquire the property, and by then, while it was still privately owned, a lot of it had been sold off. So we ended up with about a third of the block for our bus barn, and then we didn't really need it for a bus barn. We used it for bus storage. We used it for staging for both the LRT project and the arterial BRT. We stored buses there because we have a high demand for buses during the Minnesota State Fair, which is 10 days of the Great Minnesota Gathering. And, we've used it all along, but there'd been a lot of attempts to try to get it into development over the years, and they had never penciled out. They had never worked out. And so when the stadium came along, this one penciled out, and as I say, there was so much support from all of the governments involved that although, you know, negotiations always have their tough spots, but I have to say that I have great respect for everybody I worked with on this and would happily work with them again in all of these governments.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. I want to start the round of 3 nuts and bolts questions. And we're going to go back to Thatcher, and this question, which is about affordable housing, is kind of on the bubble between policy and nuts and bolts. But Thatcher, as I think many people know, Sound Transit has an unusual commitment to affordable housing in the joint development program. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. That high level of commitment means that you need to be turning. I assume it means that you need to be turning in the early days of getting going with a project to funding sources and aligning with local zoning. So without my trying to answer the question for you, can you talk about affordable housing as at least as much as an implementation issue as a policy issue?
Yeah, so briefly, just to give context to Al's comment around the policy side, which is we have statutory direction to offer at least 80% of our properties that are suitable for the development of housing first to these qualified entities to develop affordable housing on them, and that should they accept that property, it's 80% of the units at 80% of the area median income or below. And that statutory direction also gave us a new tool, which is that we can discount or even transfer property at no cost to achieve those outcomes. You know, our board embraced that direction and put in place an equitable TOD policy. I'm not going to get into the policy side since we're focused on the nuts and bolts of realizing it, which is, you know, Seattle's a very high land cost city, and the central Puget Sound has actually got 4 major cities, and there's a fair amount of job centers outside of Seattle itself. And so real estate is expensive pretty much everywhere. And so it's very cost prohibitive to be able to develop, you know, a significant amount of affordable housing, you know, using, like, say, low income housing tax credits, without trying to find really inexpensive land. And so, you know, I think a challenge for us is that if we were to even transfer property at no cost, that does not mean that a developer is going to be able to turn around and develop affordable housing. They're still going to need to go out and find other soft debt, as well as most likely find low-income housing tax credits, which in Washington State, both the 4% and 9% tax credit programs are oversubscribed, which means you're competing for scarce federal resources. You know, what is meant for us is that, you know, we have the direction to achieve affordable housing, and we have a tool to help achieve it, but not necessarily the full obligation of using that tool. But if we didn't use that tool, we probably wouldn't achieve our objectives. And so we are, you know, constantly wrestling with how do we, you know, achieve the financial goals that our program has and the system expansion plan has for things like revenue with the policy direction. So what that means is that Sound Transit has discounted property for affordable housing. Maybe Hillary, if you could pull up the slide, the second one I have, I think, or third one, it should be the Cedar Crossing project, which is the first project that our agency has done under the new statute. And so there we partnered with a local government, the Seattle Office of Housing, to offer our property at a discount. So we went from an $18.5 million property to discounted down to $6.75 million, which made it from the city being able to afford to fund an affordable housing project. Well, I should say, made it for so that they couldn't fund it if it was at 18.5, and if it was at 6.75, they could afford to do it. We didn't necessarily reduce their costs of producing affordable housing, but we were able to allow them to build affordable housing in an area of high opportunity that traditionally doesn't see a lot of substantial affordable housing projects. That said, it's about 254 units of affordable housing. They brought $15 million to the table, and that project started back in May during the recession. And we, really relied on, the creativity of the development partners. It was actually 2 nonprofit developers that partnered together to deliver that project, because it is, 254 units is a pretty big project. I'd say in general, trying to figure out what are the resources is probably the key question that we constantly ask ourselves, and how do we put resources into the pipeline. And not every jurisdiction where we have property in has a housing trust fund or other significant sources of capital dollars to put into projects. And so we are, working with the counties. We're working with a great kind of multi-jurisdictional collaboration called the Arch, which covers a lot of our east side cities, that, to try to figure out how can we bring resources to achieve affordable housing, and then what is Sound Transit's property value contribution to those efforts. And I should just mention on the nuts and bolts, the other aspect of nuts and bolts is how do you navigate federal rules and regulations, because discounting property for affordable housing is not necessarily the easiest thing to do under federal programs. That said, the FTA Joint Development Program is an incredibly flexible tool, and it was what we did at our Roosevelt site, the Cedar Crossing project, which we did as a fee simple transaction to be able to try to meet the needs of the affordable housing financing community. And so again, I think there are ways to navigate it. It's just extremely you have to be creative. And so I could go down this rabbit hole, but I don't think I'll stop.
Thank you very much. And as our listeners probably know, the newly published 2020 version of the FTA Joint Development Guidance addresses that issue and facilitates the discounting of land in a way that the policy hadn't before. I'm going to go to the next question because we have 2 more that I want to try and get them in before we go to Q&A. Debbie, this is a real nuts and bolts question about developer solicitation, and you mentioned to me the other day, and I know anyway from my experience with MATA, that MATA has had one set of experiences with unsolicited proposals and using them as a way to get development conversations underway, as well as competitive solicitations that you initiate, which you've recently done for a whole tranche of properties. But you've got institutional experience with both of those paths. And could you talk about that and how you how you decide that things are ripe to go one way or the other?
Right. So I would have to say, Al, that after the completion of our guidelines in 2010, a couple of years later, MARTA completed a strategic plan to identify TOD opportunities, what they believe to have been TOD opportunities. And from that development plan, we released 5 RFPs for 5 stations, and those stations are underway. And I will say over the last 2 years, the development community has begun to see the opportunity. Southern states are a little slower, move a little slower than other places. And so we found ourselves actually undertaking or issuing RFPs as a result of unsolicited proposals. And I'll ask Heather to pull up the second image that I sent over. Unsolicited proposals are pretty cool because, typically the developer has gone in and done some research, right? And to determine what they believe the feasibility of something being quite successful there. So we find ourselves not having to take that step. Needless to say, we do verify information that's shared, but it pretty much puts to us that there is interest in seeing something happen at a particular station. And the image that Heather would bring up would be one at Peachtree Center.
Yeah, I think Hillary is having a technical issue and is not able to get on right now.
Yeah, that's fine. So at Peachtree Center, we received an unsolicited proposal to develop basically 7,600 square feet above our head house. We have 4 head houses at our Peachtree Center station. And I'll tell you that this particular station location, if you will, was nowhere near on our radar as a possibility, because our TOD projects had been mostly underutilized surface parking lots. So you're talking about 7+ acres, right? And to have this proposal presented was interesting in itself. But I will tell you the twist and turn there is that we had a number of people submitting proposals to develop the 7,600 square foot, basically air rights. And the successful respondent was not the group that actually initiated or submitted the unsolicited proposal and initiated the RFP being released. The successful respondent was actually an adjacent property owner of a hotel, and it's going to ultimately be somewhat of a TOD transit adjacent development, because they're looking at the opportunity of connecting the TOD itself to a private structure there at Peachtree Center. I'm disappointed that I can't illustrate the slide to just show you how small this property is, but it's really interesting. And I'll tell you, we spend quite a bit of time, individuals contacting us, sharing their vision, and we definitely will encourage people to submit unsolicited proposals. Now, I will say last year in November, we decided that we have a north and south and east and west, Marta, our lines at this point are not as detailed as some others in the US, if you will. We haven't, like I said, expanded since the system was first created some 40 years ago. But we have not had transit-oriented development sponsored by MARTA, right, JD, on our south or west line. And when the opportunity presented itself where we discovered that we had 7 stations that are within the opportunity zone, we decided to go to the board and ask if we could have the opportunity to place RFPs out for these stations. And we're going to take an approach here where, and I know Thatcher was talking about affordability a little bit earlier, MARTA has a goal of establishing 20% of affordable units within any development that has a residential component. We've taken it upon ourselves to increase that to 30% on the south and west line for these stations that are in what we consider emerging markets, to have a goal of 30% of affordability at the zip code area median income. So it's going to be a little different, and that median income at the area median income at the zip code level, we're looking at 80 to 120%. And you're roughly anywhere around $25,000 to $50,000, whereas the entire metro Atlanta for 80% of the AMI sits around $82,000. So we really believe we'll have an opportunity when we actually issue these RFPs to really meet some of the affordable housing needs in metro Atlanta.
Great. There we are.
There it is. Wonderful. So we have pretty much an existing image to your left here, and you can see the head house just down low. And then here you have where the developer is proposing 40,000 square feet of development, where it would be either retail and hotel expansion of the hotel space, or retail and apartments. And considering the pandemic, we're curious as to where he will land in this particular program for the development. But definitely something, like I said, we would have never imagined, having a TOD interest here. And if not for the unsolicited proposal, I don't know if we would have ever even looked at it, to be honest, because again, like I said, our approach has been in areas where we have quite a bit of underutilized surface parking lots.
Great, thank you. That answer really illustrates the different philosophical and practical approaches that agencies can take to unsolicited proposals, depending on, what's going on in the market. But the underlying point, which the guide is very strong on, that you need to have a policy, which I know MARTA does, in which you clearly control it. Somebody makes an unsolicited proposal. If you love it, it's up to you to turn around and do an RFP, and you actually got the outcome you described. As a result of that, somebody else won. If it's another public agency making the proposal, then maybe you negotiate that directly. But I just find MARTA's history fascinating in the way that it's used unsolicited proposals when it has. Lucy, we've got about 14 minutes left and we have some questions. Shall we skip the last question of ours and go to panel Q&A, to audience Q&A?
Sure. You don't want me to talk about continuing control and lease versus sale? I mean, really?
I'd love for you to talk about that, but I think, let's
well, let me do like a 3-minute speed talk, okay? 3-minute speed talk here. Is that satisfactory continuing control? FTA sets the requirement, we have to meet it, but we would want to do this anyway because it is a transit agency's mission and purpose to take care of transit. We have had great success in various legal ways to do it, clauses, very specific clauses in ground leases and declarations, covenants, and deed restrictions otherwise. I just quickly, that the Allianz Field one, we have the right of review and approval in advance for all plans before they're submitted to a permitting authority and for all changes of use. Our review and approval is limited to transit impact so that we only determine whether or not what they're proposing would impact transit negatively. And if so, we'll work with them to find a way to accomplish their goal. And we have a process set up to do that. We require an operations and maintenance agreement so that all of the on-the-ground things are worked through with the appropriate staff, and we do monitor that every year to see that it's worked out. So lease versus sale, you can do it both ways. Lease gives you more control and allows you more flexibility to adjust over time and just easier to enforce. But yes, the satisfactory continuing control is something that I don't find any conflict between what we want to do because it's our job and what the FTA requires. So that's all I have to say about that.
Good. Okay. We've got a number of questions in the Q&A, and shall we take a few of them?
Al, I've been kind of monitoring them and try to mark. There's so many now, but I'm going to pick a couple out to call out here. One of them is that he is asking in your report, is there any discussion of the average time it takes from identifying a property, RFP development, developer solicitation, negotiations, turning dirt? The comment here is there seems to be a great deal of misunderstanding of how long the process takes or should take.
Yeah, we talk about it some, and without certainly a place where one size doesn't fit all. One specific point I recall that we made is that as I said, when you've selected somebody, your project has barely begun, and the selection method you used will have a natural relationship with what you're negotiating during the exclusive negotiating period and how long that is. So if you selected based on a full, robust RFP, where all the principal terms of the deal and all the principal aspects of the program and design were in the thing you chose, then what you're negotiating are details of the transaction and of the closing, and that negotiation, depending on the complexity of the project, 60, 90 days, not a big deal. If you selected based on a rich RFQ, which developers like sometimes because they don't have to invest in a full proposal before they know if they're in contention or not. If you selected an RFQ, and that gives you the flexibility to negotiate the the substance of the program once you've picked somebody. Well, that's a fine strategy, but that means you're going to negotiate for a year or 18 months. So you simply need to be conscious and intentional about that. In the section where we talk about the selection process for each of the principal methods, two-step, one-step, et cetera, we talk about, not that it should take this many days, but if you go this way, it's going to tend to reduce the time frame at the cost of having to do more of X or vice versa. So we talk about that without trying to be falsely precise. We do point out that time kills deals, and once you've got a developer chosen, you don't want the negotiation to be longer than it has to. But how long it has to be will may have been determined by the solicitation method you used.
Okay, I want to just, the next question I think I want to just mention but not actually answer. We've got some questions about what's the best practice for community engagement and what's the best practice for equity, and how do we in all our agencies deal with the equity questions. And I think those are going to be addressed in future RailVolution webinars, but I just wanted to give Debbie and Thatcher and Al, if we still have time, just kind of, do you want a quick response to this? Because I know these topics are so huge, but do you I mean, all of us, I think, consider equity, but just anything. I see Debbie's unmuted. So Debbie first.
Yeah, so we are fortunate to have an organization called Transformation Alliance in Atlanta, and they are kind of our watchdog for equitable TOD, if you will. And they've established a equitable tool that they would like for us to utilize during our RFP process. And we have, and it varies. If it's not a residential kind of proposal, if you will, it's a little challenging when you're talking about affordable housing, right? And then I would say from a planning standpoint and community engagement standpoint, we have basically always teamed up with the ARC, a regional planning organization, as well as local municipalities, and during their development of what we call their, it could be a comprehensive plan update or livable centers initiative process that they're going through. We have most recently, however, we were trying to undertake a rezoning for 35 acres at an Indian Kensington Station, and the community decided that they would like for us not to go forward with the rezoning, but to undertake a master planning exercise. We thought we were okay because we had participated and been engaged during one of those larger county planning exercises, but I think 5 years was too much time had passed, and they wanted to revisit that. And so we will be undertaking a master planning exercise specifically for that station, but normally we're teaming up with local municipalities to do that.
At Sound Transit, I would just add that community engagement and specifically trying to reach folks that have been underrepresented or excluded from process has been something that we've been trying to evolve our practice on and get better at. I think there's a lot of efforts by other groups and organizations in the Seattle region around equity, and we have certainly, I think, started to really do a lot in the space of affordable housing, which is one aspect of equitable development, and we continue to look more at what are some of the other outcomes that are going to provide necessary outcomes for communities, whether that is through affordable childcare, health, access to healthcare, access to education and job training programs, looking at wealth creation for communities, especially communities of color. And so we still don't have answers on exactly how we're going to achieve that. But I think what we've really committed to is partnering and recognizing that we don't have to be the experts on all that.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I want to thank everybody and thank RailVolution and thank all of you. I know we didn't answer all your questions. We'll see if we can get these printed out and figure out the answers. I do want to just throw out there for everybody to think about what national or local policy changes would be helpful to further fast track TOD. And they say TAD, but as to quote G.B. Arrington, TAD is the evil twin of TOD. So anyway, I think that's a good thing for us all to think about going forward. And just really quickly to respond to what everybody said, we have an equitable development scorecard, and let's see, what do they call it? The Transportation Alliance here, it pushes us and helps us and supports us. The advocacy groups are either your greatest ally or your worst enemy, and you should do it so that they are, you know, group A. There are a lot of great advocacy people out there. And I don't know, Al, do you have any closing remarks before we turn this back to Hillary to close it all down?
Yes, my closing remarks, in addition to thanking everybody who tuned in and is still there, is to thank the three of you, not only for being a terrific panel this afternoon, but so everybody else will know, the 32 transit agencies who gave a lot of their time in the preparation of the guide, included these three. And as well as reviewing drafts and everything else. And Lucy, Debbie, and Thatcher, you individually, your agencies, and the other 29 whose participation was just indispensable to the research and the writing. I want to thank you all.